Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my weekly wrap-up of April 19th, 2015. I hope that your weekend is treating you guys well. My weekend has been very nice, it's been very relaxed. I have spent this entire weekend sleeping in, eating chocolate muffins, doing a jigsaw puzzle, and reading books. And binge watching Orphan Black Season 2 because I have rediscovered the joy of watching that TV series. So, I've done nothing productive at all. The first book that I finished this week was Austenland by Shannon Hale. I listened to this as an audiobook. It is kind of a contemporary chick lit book, very much based on Pride and Prejudice. It's about a 30-something woman named Jane Hayes who's had a string of failed relationships and becomes more and more obsessed with Pride and Prejudice and the very, unfortunately, fictional Mr. Darcy. When her great aunt discovers Jane's shameful secret, she leaves Jane in her will a trip to a full Regency immersion experience, complete with promised romance. And Jane uses this trip as a last hurrah before attempting to give up on men. The story, like I said, was kind of predictable. If you want that Pride and Prejudice love story, this might be good, but mostly what I was feeling while listening to this was that Austenland wasn't that romantic. If I wanted the thrill of the Elizabeth Bennet, Mr. Darcy storyline, I would reread the actual book or rewatch, the 2005 movie version or something just to experience that. The characters just didn't really click with me, and the ultimate romantic part of the book didn't seem that romantic to me. I'd also like to mention that I think one of the things that people bring up the most about characters like Jane from Austenland is that she's just one more in a string of women in books who are portrayed as being unhappy or unfulfilled because they're not in a relationship. And I didn't really like that. I think that's a pretty played out character type, and it's not an example that I think that women should really be following. It's perpetuation of this myth that you have to be in a relationship in order to be happy or content with your life, that it's not enough to be an independent, single, well-educated woman who enjoys life and has talents and skills and hobbies. No, you have to be in a relationship. And it irked me a little bit. I would not overly recommend this book unless you just absolutely want to try it out. It's okay, it's not fantastic, and it's just fun. The next book that I read was The Human Division by John Scalzi. This is the latest book out in his Old Man's War series, so the next book, The End of All Things, is coming out by the end of this year. Okay, I'm going to have to spoil the end of The Last Colony for you, so if you don't want to know how that book ends, then maybe skip this part. The Last Colony ends when one of the main characters of the series, John Perry, spills the bean to Earth that they are basically being used as a farm for colonists and soldiers for the Colonial Union and the Colonial Defense Force. And they've been kept in the dark about what is really going on in the galaxy with other alien species, and they've been kept in a relatively technological backwater state. Earth rejects the Colonial Union, and the Colonial Union is now scrambling because it doesn't have that source of colonists and constant cannon fodder. They are trying to salvage their relationship with Earth and reestablish a relationship with Earth while also trying to not overly antagonize the other aliens in the galaxy because the Colonial Union just can't afford to lose soldiers in war anymore. So for the first time in the 200-year history of the Colonial Union and the CDF, they are attempting to use diplomats instead of soldiers to establish relationships with aliens. Story follows a B team, a diplomatic team. One of the members is Harry Wilson, who is a friend of John Perry's from their Old Farts Club in the first book in the series. He was a CDF soldier, but he's now more of a technician. He hasn't actually seen active combat in a couple of years. And this diplomatic team keeps running into a series of problems, traps, and so on, it becomes clear that there is a third party in the story that is trying to sabotage both the colonial union's relationship with Earth, but also its attempts to get along with the Conclave, the alien organization. So something is, some group is trying to just sabotage all the relationships in the story, and the B team is at the center of this mystery trying to figure out what's going on. In the tradition of the Old Man's War series, this is a book with really funny characters, sarcastic humor, interesting storyline. This particular book has a different format from the previous books because each chapter is an episode that was published separately, probably on Tor.com, and then combined into one book. So it's intended to be a novel, but it's also intended to be a series of episodes, which is a very different structure from the previous books. And it works quite well. I was kind of like, is this gonna work? Is it gonna just seem too choppy, or is it gonna be repetitive? There are a couple of instances where Scalzi recaps the events of a previous episode, but very quickly. And if you were reading this book over a longer period of time, I think that would be perfectly fine. I love this book quite a bit, and I read most of it in one day, so I noticed that a bit more. There is not an answer at the end of the book. All the previous books in the series have been pretty self-contained stories. While they build on each other, you can pretty much pick up any one and read it and get the complete story and not be lost. But the Human Division ends just as you're getting the final evidence that something big is going on, but this third group is not revealed, and the characters are still kind of in the dark about what's going on. So I feel like the end of all things is just going to be the second part of the story, and I'm cool with that. I think despite how it ended with not having a lot of answers, it was still quite a good book, and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was A Fall of Moondust by Arthur C. Clarke. This is another classic science fiction novel. It was published in 1961, before we landed on the moon, so it is based on what we now know as kind of inaccurate science. At the time, it was surmised that there might be a lot of dangerous moon dust on the moon that we could kick up when we landed on the moon, or that could be like entire seas or lakes of dust that would be dangerous, kind of dust that's so fine and dry that it behaves a bit more like liquid than like a solid or like sand. So if you just assume that maybe in some moon somewhere there is moon dust, then the plot of this book is perfectly fine. I didn't think too hard about it. This book is set 100 or 150 years in the future, and humans of course have moon bases. One of them is Port Roris, which has a tourist attraction called the Sea of Thirst. It is a big, really big lake of dust, and they send out a shuttle or like a moon boat on the dust with tourists on it. It's quite a sight apparently. And one day when Captain Pat Harris and his trusty sidekick stewardess take 22 tourists out on the Sea of Thirst, there is a moonquake. They fall into the dust and they are buried 10 to 15 meters underneath. They can't get a signal out, and the rest of the story is pretty much a disaster rescue recover story with the people inside of the shuttle trying to survive physically and psychologically while waiting for rescue. And then you get the perspectives of a bunch of the people trying to find them and then get them out of the dust. What I didn't like about this book was the characters. No surprise there. There are not any really good main female characters. All of the administrators, engineers, scientists, astronomers, mathematicians, people in charge are all men. There are no women with technical smarts in this book, which is kind of disappointing because there are actually female characters, but they are secondary. One is a stewardess, one is just a harpy, and the other is a former showgirl who's now a fat old woman. And that's not the best portrayal of women. However, I can't say that I really liked any of the male characters either. Just most of the characters in this book seem to be pretty stereotypical, pretty one-note or kind of cardboard cutouts of characters. What I really enjoyed, why this actually got a 3-star rating from me, was that the plot was quite good. It's a very suspenseful story. If you accept that the Moondust situation could potentially be true, then the science in the book and just how everything happens technically and scientifically is really fun. There's that sense that everything that's going to go wrong does go wrong one after another, and they have to keep coming up with new ways to solve new problems, which it's a great way to build suspense. So I really enjoyed the story, not so much the characters, but it was quite a good read. I flew through this book.